Thank you. I am so privileged to be here. I have to watch my language. And I want to thank Reverend Dr. Anna Price for inviting me. As she said, we've known each other in other incarnations, but during this lifetime. And I especially want to thank Reverend Dr. Coleman for giving us such food for thought. And for wrapping words around things that some of us may have thought before but didn't know how to express. So thank you. I was particularly struck by toward the end of your discussion of a revolution of the mind and of the spirit, because I often, I was struck dumb by parts of Dr. Phil's program. I don't know how a white person grows up in this culture without incorporating racism. For that woman or any of them to say, well, having white privilege doesn't mean you're racist. I guess what I have often called those things that pop into my mind, what were called microaggressions, like, oh, you don't look Jewish, are the kind of thing that I always think of as the outposts of the patriarchy in my mind. I haven't yet, after a long life of attempts, rid myself of the things that I grew up learning. So let me just start by telling you I'm old. I'm 73 years old, and I'm very pleased because I almost died about 12 years ago. And so these are my bonus years. These are the years where I'm not bothered. I'm going to be part of your grandchild's caucus of the not bothered, because I'm just so thrilled to be alive. I'm so blessed. I'm so excited. And tonight is one of those times that I would have been so sad to have missed. But let me just say that when Dr. Anna talked to me and told me the title, I was thinking, well, we need to expand the characteristics, because if I think of who holds power in this country, probably in much of the world, power and privilege are held in the hands of old, rich, white, able-bodied, and apparently straight men. And the further you are from those parameters, the harder it is to have power, even the power over our own lives. And that, to me, is where it starts, the power to control our own lives. Now, one of the advantages of living long is that you get some perspective. And so I want to share with you some of the things that I remember from when I was coming of age in this society. When I first I was born at the end of World War II, after Rosie the Riveter was being sent home from the higher paying jobs into either low paid service jobs or back home. And at the time I first entered the workforce, people still argued that women did not need or deserve equal pay, and no law required it. In college, in discussing my grade, my biology instructor made an overt sexual proposition to me. And how did I respond? I thought, my goodness, what did I do wrong to make him think I wanted to have sex with him? Because I really didn't. And we didn't even have the words sexual harassment to describe what had happened. Before I got married, and I was living in a town of 20,000 in northwest Indiana, my engagement had been announced in the local newspaper. My mother went with me to the doctor when I went to ask for birth control. And the doctor said, come back after the ceremony. I was trying to figure out how that was going to work. We were going to exchange vows, go to the reception, swing by his office on the way to our honeymoon. Now I know that at that point in our history, in my lifetime, birth control was illegal in some states, even for married couples. And while it wasn't illegal in Indiana, it was certainly not widely available. I moved to Florida in 1968, and Ruth Shack, who some of you may remember was a county commissioner, Ruth Shack introduced and the commission passed one of the very first lesbian and gay rights ordinances in this country. In response, the voters in Dade County, led by a Bible-spouting songstress named Anita Bryant, and carrying a banner that says, "Save Our Children," repealed that ordinance. So I have seen so much change, so much progress, just in my adult lifetime. We passed laws for equal pay and equal credit and equal education. We passed civil rights laws, voting rights, equal housing, disability rights. We got legislation against hate crimes and violence against women, hundreds of ordinances and state laws for LGBTQ rights, and finally the right to equal marriage. We won the rights to birth control and abortion. We've made so much progress. We've changed the way the law is, but we did that by changing the culture and changing the language. We stopped talking about policemen, firemen, mailmen. And when we started addressing police officers, firefighters, letter carriers, I think a whole lot more little girls and grown women could see ourselves in those jobs. And so an excellent measure of the progress we have made is the backlash that we are all facing. And this point in our history, as Dr. Anna and I were talking and saying that this reminds us of the alleged curse of "may you live in interesting times." We are living in interesting times. So what does the law have to say about the question posed here? The law says it shouldn't be that way. It should be a no. The reality is something quite different. And to understand that, I think we have to address, as I did in my written remarks, the nature of law and the nature of enforcement of law. Here's an example. If I decide I don't like the way this administration is spending my tax dollars and I don't pay my taxes, they can come for me. But if everybody decides to stop paying their taxes, and I mean everybody, there are not enough IRS agents, police officers, or jails to hold us all. It is a voluntary compliance. Law is our consent to act in a certain way and to have the power of government used against people who don't follow the law, the consensus that we've reached. So if we want to broaden access to privilege and power, we have to continue to change the culture. Only when we change the culture and the public perception, public opinion, can we then wrap law and public policy around it. I put in my remarks some examples. For example, Brown versus Board of Education. That was a law that came from the Supreme Court. It was at a time where Jim Crow laws, which really are against the core of what we say we believe as a country, as a people, but they were just right there and blatant. And so there was a strategy and an effort, and ultimately we got from the Supreme Court Brown versus Board of Education through the careful planning and strategy and work of Thurgood Marshall, who then went on the Supreme Court and then was replaced by Clarence Thomas. I'm so sorry about that. I tried to stop it. But let me say that when the Brown versus Education decision came down, it was met with tremendous resistance. And you had certain Virginia officials closed certain public schools rather than open them to blacks. Governor Orville Faubus of Arkansas called out the state National Guard to prohibit and block black students from attending high school in Little Rock. And after a tense standoff, President Eisenhower deployed federal troops so that 9 students who came to be known as the Little Rock Nine were able to enter Central High School under armed guard. As late as 1963, Alabama Governor George Wallace infamously proclaimed segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Now, the president can only call out the federal troops occasionally. If the majority of people don't agree with the law, it can't be enforced. I will tell you that in the northwest corner of Indiana, long after school prayer was ruled to be unconstitutional, we prayed before we went to lunch every day. And trust me, it was a Christian prayer. I grew up in a Christian family, and my mother's faith was very important to her in particular. Although I think she would have loved to have been here tonight. She left the Catholic Church, she and my father, over the issue of birth control. She thought you couldn't be a cafeteria Catholic. You either believed it or you didn't. And so when they went to see a priest before they were going to get married, and the priest told my father he had to convert to Catholicism, and my father said he wasn't going to do it. The priest said, "I'm not going to marry you." My father said, "Well then, the sin will be on your head because we are going to live together." I come by this naturally. I think it's genetic, maybe not, maybe it's how I was raised. But my mother, when she went looking for a church home, wanted to have a church home where she did not have to have any intermediaries between her and God. It was not the priests, not the intercessory prayers, not praying to the saints, but she wanted to have that direct communication, that direct contact. And so when I read about the work that you all are doing in the seminary and the people who attend worship services here, I thought my mother would have found this as a home. But in the end, if we want to answer the question, straight, white, Christian, and male, are these the requirements of power and privilege? We have to recognize that the law as we have it now it has to be enforced. That means we have to have some brave plaintiffs and some well-trained attorneys, and we have to have some different people on the bench. And we have to test it that way. But we also recognize that each of us, no matter how much or little traditional power we have the ability to make a difference. As students, the students here at the seminary or in high schools or colleges can speak out, can speak up. I can remember when I thought, I was in a property law class, and the property law professor was talking about how you would want to have a will, so that, or your clients, you would need to make sure that they had a will, because when your client died, he wouldn't want his widow to take off with his money to Rio with the man with the wax mustache. And everybody thought that was a funny joke except me. It assumed that all clients were male. All women were witless fools who would run off with the first smooth-talking son of a gun who showed up on the scene. And it was, so I, of course, being me, I had to speak up in class right then, right? Well, I now know more about property law than I ever wanted to know, because from then on, I got called on every day. I don't know if it was because out of the class of 300, mine was the only name he knew, or whether it was retaliation, but either way, I learned a lot. And so what I'm saying to you is, whether it's as a student speaking up, as a professor, threading the issues of equality and justice and fairness into your lessons, or whether it's sitting at the Sunday dinner table with your family and your uncle who you really like. I mean, he's the uncle who taught you how to throw a softball, and he's very funny, but he says something really dumb. I don't know why we need affirmative action. I got where I am without any special help. And you patiently discuss the issues of white privilege and the issues that Mr. Wise was speaking about, how this has been used to divide and conquer, to keep working class men like my uncle in his place by telling him he's something special because he's got white skin. So those are all little things that we can do, but some of us here are connected in the community and can work on election campaigns or work to hold our candidates accountable. There's so many ways, if you are willing to step out of your comfort zone and take the next step, whatever it is for you, to make a difference in how our country moves toward a more perfect union. I know that if all of us working together can make these changes, I've seen the changes we can make, and I can remember Sojourner Truth, who announced to a suffrage meeting that if the first woman God ever made had the power all by herself to turn the world upside down, then surely all of us good women and men here today can turn it over and set it right again. And so I think that that's where I will leave you. I'm not at all sure that the first woman God ever made turned the world upside down, but I liked the idea that we could all, working together, turn it back and set it right again. So thank you very much.